can say a few words about yourself if you'd like.
Sure, I'm Veronica Sherwood, and I'm from Halifax, and I was away and I came back. So thank you for coming.
And I spoke at the beginning, so you all know I'm Makayla, and I worked on the production and the filming for this project. But more importantly, we have other interviewees here. So Sheila, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Sheila Cole, and I've been involved with the network since it was before even the Nova Scotia Environmental Network, because when it was first formed, we operated regionally. So it used to be the Atlantic Environmental Network. So it's a fabulous network, you know, you just fall in love with it. So I've stayed with it all this time, and lots to say during the Q&A.
Howard Epstein, hi, and Makayla, congratulations, and thank you for
Thanks,
doing
Howard.
this work.
And Chris, we all know Chris, but
I'm a Newfoundlander, you should know that.
yeah, if anyone has any questions for us, not even just about the project, but just if you want to pick anyone's brains personally, if you want to ask us questions about what the network looks like today and things that we're working on, please, we're open to anything. So.
Is there a broader release plan for the film? Because it's really well done. Is there a plan to release it more widely so it can get to the masses?
Yeah, absolutely. We plan to release it digitally, virtually, very, very soon. So it will be uploaded to our YouTube channel and shared on as many platforms and forums as we possibly can, because we're aware, too, that our membership is all over the province. The Canadian Environmental Network may have an interest in watching what we've done as well, and they're actually working on their own documentary project for the greater Canadian network. So that'll be shared at some point for everyone across Canada. Yeah. Was there anything I missed about that?
No, we'll probably, hopefully maybe in the fall do like a virtual screening so we can get some more panelists together so people can watch it and actually get some feedback from people involved.
Yeah. And the reason I brought my phone up to hit record is a few people did send their regrets that they couldn't make it today and asked, is there any way you could record the event or record your Q&A session just so we could have a sense that we were there. So we'll do our best to upload kind of a summary of what we talk about if the discussion continues today. Yeah. Anyone else?
Well, I think just before we leave that question, I think
Sure.
that this film is going to be really important because, we have managed to put it together. Whereas the Canadian Environmental Network did some initial interviewing last year, but, they parallel us so closely. Everything that has happened to us here in Nova Scotia, it's the very same situation at the Canadian Environmental Network. So I can see this being used to help us with our fundraising events within the RCEN as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it should be wonderful. I saw in the back, yeah.
I just wanted to ask, the film ends on everybody talking about the lack or the loss of core funding, and I wonder if there are any sort of initiatives or any, has there been any progress in securing any kind of sort of consistent funding to have a kind of stable group?
We've certainly been trying. That is the goal. I think one of our challenges is succession. I've been doing this 5 years, and I may not be in Nova Scotia past this year if I'm finishing school, and I don't know where life will take me after that. So it really needs, even like we had $10,000-$20,000 a year back in the day, to have someone even part-time to be there reliably doing enough work to keep it up and securing more funding. So if we could even get $10,000 a year, I think it would be enough, because we've been fortunate to have sustainable capacity solutions helping us. They're based in Ontario, and they're like a network of organizations that solely exist just to support environmental nonprofits across the country. So that's the only reason we were able to hire Makayla, and the other long-term staff that we've had these last few years is through them. Sometimes it's 100% funding for an internship. That's very rare. Usually they'll give you 75 to 80%. So for a year, you still need probably $10,000 to contribute if you're making up 20-25%. So if we had that much money, our revenue every year that we can actually use is about $5,000. A lot of that gets spent on the things that any organization needs to run. So if we could bump that up $10,000 a year, then that would probably be enough to make it self-sustaining. And I was hoping to convince the provincial government to provide that, but that did not work. Yeah.
There's a federal component to this. So, you know, when things were first formed, it was environmental groups getting together with the Federal Department of the Environment, and we ended up joining RCEN because the federal department is, you know, directed to consult with people. And so, as it said in the film, we were just doing the larger groups, but not, you know, meeting out across the country. And so we did have that core funding initially came from Environment Canada. And so right now, I'm on a small committee that is continuing. We're doing, you know, a new effort. Have been in contact with the minister's office and some people at the department. And I can, you know, see the way this film is going to help in those efforts, because if we could get the amount of money that we used to have annually from the federal government, which was just over $1 million, and half of that was the operating budget. The other half was used for face-to-face consultations, you know. But I mean, you know the amount of the money the federal government gives, you know, here and there, and you know, so if we could be able to have that amount of money again, we would be very lucky. And in 2011, when that funding was cut, you know, you probably noticed on the screen, and you know, you probably remember that it was the end of the Harper era. So it was not the department itself that well, the department did the cutting, but it was the momentum of the Harper government in its outright attack on civil society, and it was finally our turn.
Yeah.
And we thought that the new Liberal government would pick it up because it was so obvious, and they have never done that. And so, you know, having this film to sort of give the overarching picture of the value of the networks is really critically important.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you, Sheila. Did you want to add to that, Veronica?
Oh, just the fact that, and I wish I had an answer, but I've never been able to understand, and Howard probably have some opinion on this, or Mark's in the room, or other people, is the relationship between the environmental community and the province of Nova Scotia, and why that has been such a tremendous challenge. And why that was such a tremendous challenge with an organization that was very clear about its mandate and very clear that the members were the people that, you know, individuals that were taking issue on certain things, not the network itself. And it stymies me that still, you know, I've been in government myself. In the last meeting I had with Chris, and where we went, it was almost, you know, you felt you were talking one of those conversations where you're just not going to be heard, and you know it, even while you're having the conversation. It was very much like that. And to me, that's a big part of this problem, is that, and now we're potentially in a worse situation than we were. So you know, I'd be curious what other people here think about the relationship with the province, and why is it that the network obviously seems like such a threat? Because that's how I interpreted our last meeting.
That's a good point.
Can I say, it's extremely difficult to try to measure success in any endeavor, and the concern that I hope everyone in this room has, which is to achieve sustainability throughout a whole variety of sectors of our activity and our lives in Nova Scotia, is just kind of a fundamentally important thing. But even though there has been an fundamental environmental statute since 1970 in Nova Scotia, and a provincial government Department of Environment since around the same time, they've never really taken it seriously. And it's to some extent an achievement that the public demand for recognizing the importance of sustainability has called upon government to adopt various pieces of legislation and to create a department and to kind of move in that direction, and to at least give some acknowledgement of the fact that these are important. This is an important policy direction, and indeed may affect our life support systems. That this I've never had the experience of really being convinced that this is a top priority for the provincial government the way it ought to be, and so it's reflected in things like what you think should be fairly automatic of putting a few dollars into hearing what it is that people on the ground have actually learned and identify as the important problems around the province. You'd think that this would happen fairly automatically.
It's quite frightening because I see the same activity now changing in terms of homelessness and poverty. I'm seeing the same.
Can you speak up, please?
Sorry, I was just going to say that it's frightening because now I see the same type of approach to housing and poverty in this province. Mm-hmm. Is that there's a lot of talk, there's a lot of awareness, but when you really look into it, there's, from this current government, in my opinion, there's very little real action. And so first we talk about the depletion of the environment, and now we're talking about the depletion of human beings and families. Those things are related. They've always been related in Nova Scotia. And now again, we're in a situation where we've got two, as an individual, as an activist, I've got two issues that I'm dedicated to. Mm-hmm. And I have so much time, and I have to choose where I have to put my time. Mm-hmm. It's a difficult time, and again, they're very closely related. So. And not to be too morbid.
Yeah. We did go to the provincial government as soon as the cuts happened in 2011. And so it was the McNeil government that was just taking over. And so as soon as he took over, he stated that the provincial government was not going to pick up any funding loss from anywhere that resulted from cuts that the Harper government had made. And we really went at it so hard within the network, trying to find funding. And I spent 3 entire months directly in contact with Stephen McNeil's office to try to get some movement, and there was just no movement whatsoever. I'd like to mention Sterling Beliveau, the one environment minister, which is kind of funny because, when he first came in, we weren't that warm to him in the movement because we thought, oh, he doesn't know. And he said as much, he was sharing both environment and oceans at the time. A huge spread, but I mean, he was totally an appropriate person for the oceans, but didn't know much about environment. But speaking about governments and help for the network, Gretchen Fitzgerald and I drove down to his office. I forget which year it was, maybe 2013 or something like 2012 or 2013, in the middle of the summer, and met with him directly. And I gave him, a background history of all the stuff that we had accomplished, and he understood it, and he supported it. And the NDP government, because of his efforts, put $20,000, which is enormous. It's like a drop in the bucket, but he actually did that. And then the Liberal government put in later, $5,000 from some small thing. But the thing is, it's unfortunate that NDP government just had the one term. Because we got to Sterling just at the end of that first term, and he certainly indicated that his interest was there, and that he would, if they were reelected, that that there could be more coming.
Right. Nancy, you had a question.
I guess maybe Howard can answer it. First of all, great editing.
Thank you. And there was a team of editors that helped with this as well, volunteers, service learning students, and other staff. So, yeah. Props to them as well.
There was a polluters fund or a polluters fund that was mentioned by Joanna.
Right.
So how is that? What happens to that money? It doesn't stay dormant. I imagine it's not really dormant.
I have to say I've lost track of whether that money is actually being used or whether it continues to sit there. I'm not sure. Makayla, did you run into an answer on that?
Not exactly, no. And Joanne's experience with that would have been more recent than some others sitting on the panel. Joanne was with the network until about 2018 when you started?
We've been following the trust fund, and it no longer exists. They changed the whatever act it was under, so they could move the funds elsewhere. They assured us it would be going to, some other climate or environment-related fund. We haven't gotten an update on specifically where that money is going.
Yeah, they refused. And again, in and out of the department, in and out of the department. And Lori Roberts, I don't know if any of you in the room remember Lori Roberts, but I mean, she worked in the minister's office, and she would be the one that we would have to talk with a lot. And at one meeting she said, look, I just want you to stop coming here and asking the same thing, And you know what the reason they gave for not doing anything with this fund? So $300,000 was that if they opened the fund and did anything with it at all, they'd have to spend all of the money just to manage the fund. And yet look at what we have to do with our few dollars that we managed to put together.
Yeah. I mean, great question. I wish that we had more of an answer of where that money went and what was being done with it, but I guess we just don't know.
Hector, you had a question?
My name is Akhtar. I used to volunteer when Tamara was there, and I still remember how we visited and Harper put on the curbs on the funding she got voted. So I've come to an NSEN meeting after maybe about 11, 12 years. So how it has transitioned from when Tamara was there and where it is now, just in general.
The transition from when Tamara was there? Do you want to speak to that first, Chris?
I don't think I was even living in Nova Scotia when Tamara was there. I don't know much about how things were run other than what's in the documentary. I haven't actually spoken to Tamara myself.
So I spoke to Tamara during her interview, and Tamara lives in Toronto area, which is why she can't be here today. But after Tamara left as executive director, Janelle took over briefly as executive director, and it lasted, I want to say 2 years was the period, and then we moved into having a volunteer chair of the network kind of run the show, run everything possible, and that was all in volunteer capacity, which obviously is a lot more difficult than even a part-time executive director as a staff person. And Joanne, who spoke in the film, was one of those chairs, but there were 3 or 4 different chairs between that period of 2013 to 2018 or so when Chris took over. And we aren't familiar with all of them, honestly, as the current board of mostly new board members. We don't know all of those people and what their contributions would have been during that time. So it's a bit of a mystery, I guess. I can't fully answer your question. Sorry.
I was just talking in general.
Yeah.
I will say we are more virtually capable now. Like we have the webinars that were mentioned, we're doing those pretty regularly. Things like that weren't done 10, 12 years ago. The pandemic kind of brought everyone into Zoom life anyway, so it kind of worked out for us because we didn't have the money to be doing a bunch of in-person events. We were doing a bunch of online events, and they're actually very well attended, and people seem to kind of almost prefer that now, for many people anyway.
It's a lot more flexible.
Yeah. And you can reach people all over the province. We are a provincial network, so it's difficult for us to organize events in Cape Breton or down in Yarmouth when most of us live in Halifax. So it works out well being able to do things online so people can attend wherever they are. But we do want to get back into doing more in-person things. That's one of our top priorities because that's what real networking is. Actually get to talk to people face to face, right?
Did you have a question, Mark?
Kind of, yeah. And that's a good point, Chris. Like the annual gathering was a wonderful event, so to be able to host that again would be great. I also wanted to say thanks for showing extra footage of mine art. Really appreciated that. And on the question of funding, congrats. Sounds like you brought in some other funding.
More than we expected to.
Yeah, so good for you. It is problematic, though, of course. I mean, while the NSEN may not be doing a lot of advocacy itself, the groups that it's working with or represents is doing a lot of advocacy. So to have core funding from government, there's perhaps a conflict there, or at least government perceives a conflict there, and certainly the fact that when you get a government coming in like the Harper government that's antagonistic in many ways to the environmental movement, yeah, they're not going to see much, a big reason for funding something like the NSEN, and I think that's the challenge. You know, I think originally the funding started because the government saw it as a good way to, like, it would make their life easier in terms of consultation and getting input from a kind of messy ecosystem, if you like, or messy groups that weren't well organized. So I think the original impetus, partly with CEN, was that we can help you in your consultations. And I don't know if that pitch would still work with governments. Certainly they're doing a lousy job on consultation and getting input from citizens and environmental groups. So if there was a way to show that a group like NSEN or CEN would help them do that and make it a more legitimate process, maybe that's one avenue. But
Yeah.
some thoughts.
Yes, first time that I'm coming and the first time that I see your group, that is great. So, connecting, I agree what you said, and because maybe we should go back beginning when they decided to get found, was it 70s? Maybe?
77.
Totally different period, and there was the motivation to give funds because yes, the government wanted to reach consultation. There was the politics environment, energetic crisis in that period. Everything was to connect, to push to have this kind of associations. Then, as we were seeing, there was a crisis, but the crisis maybe was rated us because there was a kind of a calm period around ecology and environment. I mean, there was not the need. Everybody we were happy, money, business, and I was always on the side of the environment, and but there was not the great necessity. Now it changed. Now I think that this is a moment, maybe the biggest moment that we can and we need to act, because there is a real energetic crisis. The environment started to show the effects that we knew that would happen now. 2030 could be one of the maximum point of it, and we see. I'm from Italy, and it is enough to see what's happening in Italy now. So one of the most important industrial region, is underwater. We had the water there for 2 weeks. It's totally destroyed now. So we see the effect. Now it's time to act. However, my lead suggestion is the necessity to go real to focus on the points that are important. So for me, it's not anymore the moment to suggest to switch off the light 1 hour per day, or try to not take the engine and switch on. So this is nothing. This is nothing. Now we need to focus on the real point that can make the change. For example, why we don't press this real switch in production energy from renewable resources? Maybe because we are afraid this is business, and when these things are business we don't like anymore. This is terrible. So we could change, we could totally resolve the problem if we could switch in a renewable energy production, in photovoltaic PV systems, wind. Why? So we should, for example, one of the things that I think an association has to do is making conferences in person, not on Zoom, please, to explain the benefits of this solution. And this is the fight. An example of the fact I see that it can happen is because, for example, I had the occasion, sorry, just to read that the government has pushed the Nova Scotia Power to give the data of the smart meters to the public. And this is very important because it can have the data of the consumption, and Nova Scotia Power had to do this before April 4th. This was mandatory. And Nova Scotia Power didn't do. So I was speaking with them, and they didn't do anything about this law. So one of the things is that maybe the laws are there, but if there is not the public and the process to act, the laws stay there and nobody applies. So I think this is one of the things that we can do. So stay focused on the important things and bring people to push, and maybe the laws are there. So,
Yeah.
sorry.
No, that's great. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, and Mark as well. Thank you.
Can I say, it's a good point. This is a time of crisis now.
Yes.
I mean, the crisis that those of us who were around a long time ago kind of anticipated was going to come has clearly now arrived.
Yes.
And this is a moment where organizations like the NSEN, I think, can up the ante by being more vocal and encouraging the member groups to be more vocal and push hard. My own experience was that after I left the years being director of the Ecology Action Center, I went into electoral politics, and I was on city council, I was in the provincial legislature. My observation from 20 years as an elected official is that many politicians react to public pressure and to articulated demands from the public. They don't initiate them very much themselves, but they will react if they think that issues have been identified by the public, matter to the public, and they're voting issues for the public. So this is, particularly in a time of crisis, a really important step for any organization to take. This is a good moment to move ahead now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you spoke about meeting face to face. The face to face meetings are so important. And the federal minister of the environment now, I've heard him speak a couple of times in the last couple of weeks on biodiversity, because the big international meeting just happened. And so the big thing is that everybody across the board is needed to be able to address this problem with biodiversity. But at the same time, they're not directly engaging the environmental community. Just once again, they're cherry picking those big organizations, just like they used to way back before 1977, and not dealing with the small groups who know what's going on the ground, in their communities, who, can do a lot of the work there. So one thing that elected officials pretty much demand is that you have to have numbers, great numbers. You can go and talk logic to them until the cows come home, but they want the numbers. And I think that we're at a stage right now where we have to start putting our numbers together. I think that we should get back to some kind of old-fashioned ways of doing things, which is having paper that people sign, and take a big paper to these, a big pile of paper to these officials, and also to the media. We haven't been using the media, and if we can't make any headway, we have to start using the media. And so the Sustainable Development Goals, public participation is part of that. And the Sustainable Development Goals were first tabled about 6 or 8 years ago within the UN. Well, public participation is on everybody's lips, but there's complete and total erosion of public participation. And hardly anybody is being invited to the table, and they're supposed to be sitting at home alone in their little boxes, putting together something without having the option of talking to each other. And so the webinars and the Zoom calls and all that kind of stuff is really great, but there's nothing that can go beyond face-to-face engagement, face-to-face planning. And I think we're in a good position to, we need to get back to that. There's not a lot of option.
Yeah. I think I'll just add a little bit to that for those that are a little bit less familiar with NSEN too, and I'm sure you got this from the film, but the organization is nonpartisan as well, so that can be a challenge sometimes for us as individuals who are very passionate environmentalists and want to share our opinions and our feelings with others and with government and other stakeholders. it's not really our place as NSEN to do that. Our place as NSEN is to be the host of these face-to-face meetings and to hold consultation sessions that bring our members to the table to talk with corporations and with government and give them the opportunity to share their feelings on it, where NSEN is not really the one to share our opinion. We are the neutral host, the nonpartisan organization that can bring others to the table, just to reiterate from what we talked about in the film, because this is a table of passionate people, this is a room of passionate people, and we all feel really strongly about what's going on with the environmental movement today, but NSEN can be the host for this, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, NSEN cannot go to the media or to anybody and say NSEN thinks this.
Exactly.
Because we have, so many different voices and so many different interests within the networks. But the individuals within the networks, they can do that. They're just speaking as individuals, or they're speaking on behalf of their group. But they won't speak on behalf of the network because it doesn't work that way.
Right. Yes.
I wonder if that's a part of the kind of problem. And I don't mean to, just in terms of when people speak as individuals, doesn't that somehow lessen the impact of when it, so accommodating a difference in a kind of position is one thing, but I think maybe not having a position might contribute to a kind of dilution of kind of putting the pressure. So I guess how does an organization maintain that will not take a position, but then have impact? I guess that's what I wonder about. When in a position of crisis where there has to be some kind of pressure, and if there isn't, as an organization, the organization can't take a stand, and it's left to individuals or individual organizations within that network, doesn't that lessen the impact of the network?
Yeah, I think I can sort of bring something to this, is the fact that having a staff person, when I was executive director, we made it very clear that we were a consultation wing of the federal government, and that's what we offered. Yeah. We did that work through the caucuses, the Forestry Caucus, Marine, etc., that those people had the opportunity to hear and go into these consultations if they chose. At the same time, we stated a division between the fact that the NSEN as an entity did not take positions. However, those splinter, for a better word, committees that were forestry, mining, et cetera, those organizations could speak on behalf of their people. And I always found that to be a helpful tool, because we had both at that time the notion of, we're nonpartisan, so come and talk to us. But these are member groups of one particular with an interest. As an environmental organization, a network, we can't condone or speak on their behalf, these organizations. And that worked actually well, because then also some of those caucuses could apply for their own funding.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So like the Education Caucus got money for funding, or this. So we really tried to walk a thin line, which was, this is not the position of the Nova Scotia Environmental Network, because that's everybody. This is the position of the Nova Scotia Environmental Network Forestry Caucus or Oceans Caucus.
Right.
So I think that model worked. But again, as soon as the funding, just when you don't have that people in the office to help assist those organizations, that's what made it difficult. And at that time, different from today, there's so many, everybody's talking about the environment. So now we're getting into, honestly, if you have a forestry caucus, is everybody going to be on the same page in that discussion? Mm-hmm. So I still like the model. It's a little bit more complex now.
That was going to be my response as well, Veronica. Well said. NSEN's role is to bring people together so they can take positions in a more effective way under a more unified voice. And it's easier for us to do that if we're not actually taking positions ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
We'll say to We have probably about 10 more minutes
Yeah.
before we have to start cleaning up. The library closes at 5. But yeah.
For sure.
Just wondering, there were a few mentions of the New Brunswick Environmental Network and how the government, like the potential government, kept funding them. I'm just wondering, I guess something like linking back to maybe one of the earlier talking points of like, why is it that the Nova Scotia government is so, like, I'm just curious if folks have like any idea, like, why is New Brunswick?
Yeah, New Brunswick.
Regardless of like Irving being there, like how come? I'm just.
Yeah, people are often puzzled by that.
Yeah.
So they have a trust fund in New Brunswick where all of the recycling deposits and stuff, they all go into this trust fund, and there's, I can't remember how many millions of dollars a year that gets distributed to many, many different groups, not just the New Brunswick Environmental Network. But that's how NBEN has been funded for a very long time now, is by getting their caucus groups, their coalitions, and core funding for an executive director to run all their programs through that. And we don't have the same mechanism in Nova Scotia. Our recycling stuff goes to like a different kind of fund, like Divert Nova Scotia. So it's just an unfortunate difference in the way things are set up.
Yeah, the amounts of money are astonishing. The Nova Scotia Environmental Network and the Conservation Council of New Brunswick each get in excess of $1 million a year from their funds. I mean, it's unbelievable. And I'm so glad, Veronica, that you brought up this whole subject of why is it? I think that is a good discussion for us to be starting to have in the province, to say to the government, why is it? Because there's no good reason. And you know, when we did have our funding from the federal government, I mean, that was our training ground. And we enriched this province tremendously by bringing all the knowledge that we had, you know, and applying it on the ground here. And quite often, when it came to seeing officials, sometimes you'd meet them at the consultation table in Ottawa. People from Nova Scotia, you didn't have the opportunity to meet them here. But in recent years, there have been more, you know, there have been quite a few conferences that we've been able to attend and so on and so forth, but not the way. You know, we're the ones with the EGSBA. You know, we were the ones that developed EGSBA. It was so exciting. But, you know, the engagement part is still missing in action.
Maybe the thing we could do is go to the media about the fact that there's this untouchable trust fund. Like that's kind of a, you know, kind of makes them look a little awful, right? You can't organize well enough to send out the money that you're collecting. Come on. Some pressure on that one.
Yeah, they found quite a bit of money for clean very recently. I think we wanted like maybe 0.1% of that value. So it was money.
Somewhere.
The environmental community has always challenged in Nova Scotia the development and the use of resources. It's a resource-based province. And so every element, the environmental people have been right there, whether it's overfishing or deforestation or climate change or all these things. We're a small province, everybody is there. And it's always been, it's a tough fight based on the province that we live in, based on our reliance on natural resources, and depending on who the government is at the time. So it's never been an easy, you know, it's never been an easy walk. And so that leads me to think about, you know, again, the need for membership and the need for grant writing in terms of other organizations. Because we could spend, and I have spent a lot of time hoping and wishing that the government's going to pony up, and they're not. They haven't shown that they're going to, and the feds are on a completely other track now with their consultation on the issues around First Nations rights, which I completely support. So I think it's going to start to move into a conversation about other ways of fundraising and how that's going to work, because, you know, we put a lot of time into the presentation and having these conversations, and at some point think, well, we need another incredible way to sort of bring in some dollars. So when you all get the letter in the mail.
We probably have time for a round of final thoughts, if anyone would like to.
Love to see so many people out. That's a great thing.
We started off with having Catherine Martin, come, and I just want to say a couple of things about Indigenous involvement in the network over the years. We've had some very, very strong times. We've had, Indigenous involvement throughout, but there have been some periods where it's been really extraordinary, and a lot of it was when you were executive director, Veronica, and we had the great fortune of meeting. We met at a private retreat center just out of Tatamagouche, a Buddhist retreat center, because we could rent that and it suited our needs and our pocketbooks and so on and so forth. It became kind of like sacred ground to us. And we would always, whether it was then or at other times, even to this day, if we have a gathering, we open the gathering with smudging. Even in 2017 in Truro, we had someone there doing smudging for us. We had a drumming group for our evening event at that in Truro in 2017. And throughout, we've often had pipe carriers who come, and so we respect the traditions of the pipe carrier while they're there. And we even had sweat lodges a couple of years when we were at Denmaling. So tipping the hat to Indigenous involvement and Indigenous forms of government, of governance, have informed our provincial networks and also the national network. Yeah. We just now automatically meet in circle. Anytime we come together, we're always in circle. We do consensus decision making, we do talking stick, etc., and so forth. So, and now, Indigenous people are kind of carrying the ball because of land rights, so it's more important than ever for us to be working together and for us to get behind the things that they're doing to strengthen, their voice.
Yeah. Thank you, Sheila. Yeah, thanks. What would you share?
Final thoughts. Very happy to see Meinhardt's family here. Thank you for coming. And I had to giggle because when I was watching that, and Meinhardt was talking, and I hadn't made the connection. Meinhardt was talking about kind of trying to temper people's passions or temper their emotions. And I thought, because Meinhardt hired me, actually. And I always found like him, because he did that a lot with me. He was always trying to get me to slow down, trying to get me to blah, blah, blah. And I was a lot younger there, so far more like, and so that was really wonderful to see. His poor children must have been, But so thank you very much. Just a nod to that, and also to these wonderful two people for what you've done. You've done an amazing job, and all of the people that you've worked with to bring this together, to bring it to light. Congratulations. You've worked hard. I think it's very, very inspiring. And thanks everybody for coming. So those are my final thoughts. Thanks, Veronica.
Yeah, just thank you guys all again for being here and for contributing to this discussion that we got to have at the end. I think is great, and we do really need to start our cleanup now and bringing the event to a conclusion. But if anyone has last thoughts in the audience that you want to share, just like stick around to ask us questions, feel free. But we'll get started on that now. So thank you again for coming. Yeah.